Kia ora, good people. This is the Future of Auckland Sport. I do need to mute my own computer. Whether you're watching us live online or on replay as it goes viral around the world, welcome. It's great to have your company. This was supposed to be an ordinary Zoom call from Andrew Dewhurst's basement. Thankfully, Regional Facilities Auckland and ATEED have come to the party, and we're now in the magnificent Herald Theatre here at Auckland Live. Unfortunately, multiple cameras, I don't know where they are, and they're all capturing my worst sides. Yes, Dean McLaughlin from United via Sport. Do not adjust your computer settings. This is as good as your picture is going to get. But thankfully, I'm not the focus, because today, for this inaugural webcast, we're exploring the future of women's sport in 2020's very surreal, pandemic-struck environment. Now, this episode, which focuses on women's sport, will be followed by webcasts on community sport and high-performance sport. In all three shows, we will look to identify the issues facing the city's sporting communities and bat around tactics to help unite Auckland via sport. Today, our sporting deep dive on the future of women's sport will be with football champion Dr. Michelle Cox, player, administrator, World Cup procurer. We'll then rip into a panel discussion with Jenny Wiley, Lara Collins and Vanya Wolfgraham, working through the challenges facing women's sport and brainstorming potential initiatives. In between these live discussions, we'll enjoy insights from Barbara Kendall and Kieran Smith, two of the sharpest brains in New Zealand sport. And we'll also have Andrew Dewhurst facilitating from the control room. Actually, that sounded a bit ruder than I meant it to be. If you are catching us via Zoom and want to interact in real time, just chat message Andrew and he will pass on your questions to our panel. If you're Jacinda, Lord or Lydia, he'll probably put you to air. So feel free to post on Facebook as well. We want to engage. But first, here is our feature interview. I'm joined by a supremely talented woman whose personal story in a lot of ways mirrors the development of women's sport in New Zealand. Fresh from being on the steering committee, who earned the right to co-host the 2023 Football World Cup here in New Zealand. Here's Chief Executive of the New Zealand Football Foundation, former football fern, Dr. Michelle Cox. Welcome. Now, you played for the Football Ferns for almost 13 years. You were a first choice player for most of that time, yet you only played 18 tests. How's that possible?
Well, one, it was in the 1800s, so that's one thing, but we really, there wasn't the investment in the game, there wasn't the support, I guess, that there is now. So I remember a period where we, of 3 years, where we only went or played on one game. So that's why there's only 18 caps to my credit.
That's freaky. So how far do you think your sport and women's sport has grown in that time that you've been involved at a high performance level?
Just massively. It's so great to see, not just from a football perspective, but all sports. So when I started in 1973, that's very embarrassing.
As a kid?
As a kid, obviously. So it was just me and 500 boys playing in the Eden midgets, as we call them those days. Now a third of the player base are girls and women. And if you look at the growth overseas, I mean, there are 9 million female players in the United States alone, 120,000 in Iran. So you're talking about a massive growth in participation, but also from viewership. I mean, the last Women's World Cup in France had a broadcast audience of over 1 billion people.
So the world is starting to dial into the attributes, the benefits of women's sport.
Absolutely. I mean, it's also, you know, the growth has been from a technical side too. I mean, when we played, because we didn't have that investment, there wasn't the same training and sports science support, for example, around the game. But just seeing where our teams have come in all sports and how amazingly athletic the women are and what great athletes they are, it's just wonderful to see.
Your first official position at New Zealand football came about in quite a staggering way, didn't it?
Yes, it did. Actually, it came out of a human rights case. So what happened is the amalgamation between, and this has not just happened in football actually, between the Men's Association and the Women's Association. And unfortunately at that time all the investment got taken out of women's football and channelled into men's football. So a group of people took New Zealand football to the Human Rights Commission and underwent mediation, and part of that, I guess the agreement was that there would be a head of women's football for New Zealand football, and that's how I came into that position.
And so you got in there for a position that they didn't really want you for, and you set about getting the inaugural Under-17 Football World Cup to New Zealand.
Absolutely. So part of the strategy that I wrote was to change the perception of women's football, because at that stage it was really, everyone was supportive of young girls playing, but when it translated to elite football, it was treated like a kick and giggle game. So the idea was to bring a World Cup down to New Zealand to try and change those perceptions, and it absolutely did that.
And North Korea won, and they all got to live, so that was pretty cool. New Zealand football's gone really well in recent times. We're looking at pay parity, prize money parity, travel arrangements for both the Football Ferns and the All Whites. That is a great development.
No, it's absolutely, there's been great progress in this area. What I would say is that it is easier for sports that don't have central contracts for women. So for example with cricket and rugby, because they're paying the players, it's much more difficult to have parity than it is perhaps with football, where the clubs are paying the players. So what I would like to see now is parity more around the fringes, in terms of, okay, if the women go to a promotional engagement, they get paid for that as well. And also at community level, there's definitely still a lot of work to do in terms of parity in the way that girls and women are treated in clubs.
When you look at the Football Ferns 20th in the world in the rankings, FIFA rankings, the All Whites are in the 130s. So New Zealand, from a football perspective, our women can go out there and compete on the world stage, potentially even more so than the men.
Absolutely, and I mean, what we have to look at is that football is a truly global game. So there are only 2 countries in the whole world that don't play women's football, and that's Brunei and Yemen. And so you're playing over 210 countries, and there are 150 countries on the national ranking of FIFA. So our women are 16th at the moment. That's an amazing achievement, and they've actually copped quite a lot of criticism for not getting through, for example, to the second round of the World Cup or the Olympics. But for them to be competitive with countries like the US, when we put 1 million in, they put 20 million in. So I think they do really well, and I think it's pretty harsh to give them that sort of criticism.
How has COVID affected football in New Zealand?
Actually, in terms of registrations, it actually, obviously there's been variation in different places, but overall, from what I understand, it hasn't affected the registrations. What will be interesting is to see whether the actual payment of the fees for those registrations has gone down, and whether it's certain groups, because I would suggest that there are groups that don't even get the chance to think about registration because they can't afford it. So those are the groups that we really need to focus on and make sure we support.
So how do we get that financial support? New Zealand Sport, Sport New Zealand is obviously getting in behind you.
I think they're doing an amazing job to support sport. There has been, in some circumstances, I think the sporting associations are better off because of that extra support that they're getting. So I don't think there's too much to complain about, to be fair.
Are women supporting women enough, and particularly in the football realm?
Yes, I think so. I think obviously it comes down to personalities, and there'll always be women who support women, there'll be others that don't, and it's a human nature thing. So I don't think it comes down to groups, I think it comes down to individuals.
And looking ahead, we've got 3 World Cups coming up in the next few years: rugby, cricket and football. What's that going to do for women's sport in New Zealand?
Oh, it's going to be amazing. I mean, we just saw, there are three great sports. We've got a catering for a great group of diversity in terms of tastes of sport. So that for one, I'll definitely be at all three World Cups, watching and supporting our teams, obviously. But I think in terms of having that talent on our doorstep and people being able to see that, particularly kids, boys and girls, going, wow, those people are amazing. I want to be like them. That is going to be huge.
Are we in a position to capitalise on the legacy from these World Cups?
Yeah, I think we need to have a carefully thought out strategy, and a lot of that is inspiring the kids around a World Cup and making sure we do that, because there have been instances where that it's come and gone and we haven't capitalised on that. So I hope that in all three instances we have very, very good legacy strategies that are long-term, not just short fixes.
And just on that, have you talked with the organisers of the other World Cups? Are you going to be doing legacy stuff together?
I would hope so. I haven't personally, obviously, but that's up to the local organising committees for each of the three cups. So I'm sure that they're all thinking about that.
Michelle, it's a remarkable story, yours. Mediation appointed into a trailblazing role, and then we haven't even discussed what you've done with FIFA all around the world. But you've come back and you've been part of the steering committee that secured this Football World Cup. What are your key learnings from your career since you started there in 2006?
Oh, that's like a question like this. There's so many learnings, but I think, particularly one thing that I learnt going into, I think I worked in 70 different countries all around the world, and what I learnt is that we have to, now with our demographics changing very drastically, particularly here in Auckland, we need to be able to cater for different levels, different tastes, different diversity in terms of, I think I told you a story about working in Zatari refugee camp where we brought women in to do a football program, but what we hadn't realised is these women had not only never played football, they'd never played sport before. So we had to teach them how to throw, we had to teach them how to kick, we had to teach them how to run before we could even engage in sport, and that may be the case where we have to step back to here in New Zealand.
And you could have taught them how to fundraise. I understand your mother...
my mother's magnificent at fundraising, and this is a great story. She was the first football fern captain in 1975 who actually won the Asian Cup, so they were very successful. But to get to, I think it was Hong Kong, they had to fundraise their own tickets and so on. And what they did is they went into bars and restaurants and charged 20 cents a kiss for their, I won't want to say services, but that was the way they fundraised, and we don't have to do that now, so we're very, very lucky.
Oh man, I'd love to give that a nudge. I don't think anybody else would. Just a final question, is the best yet to come for you and your career and the sport?
Oh, for sport, definitely. I think these three World Cups and hopefully the legacy programs around them will create that platform to take women's sport to, I guess, that equal viewer. That's where I see the media coverage, the viewership, that's where we can really make a difference, because the kids do respond to that, and if we're on TV where our great athletes are on there every day, that will be fantastic.
Yeah, well, media share of voice is something that we are definitely going to be looking at with our panel, which is coming up. We're going to have a panel discussion basically in three parts. It's going to be vision and challenges, ideas and initiatives. We'll tell you who those amazing panellists are in a minute. But just thank you so very much, Michelle, for your time. It's awesome to have you here. And you're going to be replaced on the stage by Jenny Wiley, the Chief Executive, who guided netball from the outhouse to the penthouse. We've got Lara Collins, who's the dynamic Chief Executive of the wonderfully inclusive Waka Ama New Zealand. And we have Vanya Wolfgram, who's former Black Fern and currently the New Zealand Rugby's Women's Rugby Development Officer in the Blues Auckland region. So brilliant people, awesome practitioners. I can't believe they're here, to be quite honest. It's awesome. And they'll be with us after we hear from New Zealand Olympic Committee CEO Karen Smith and Olympic legend Barbara Kendall on the state of women's sport in New Zealand.
When you look at the results that our female athletes are achieving now, it's phenomenal. You know, it really is. They're punching above our weight. We're carrying, you know, it's an incredible amount of female role model sports people that are coming out with you know, amazing leadership capabilities, awareness, all those sorts of things. We're in great shape.
Oh, I think it's come a massively long way. I mean, you just even think about the fact that, reflecting now, Rio 2016 Olympic Games, women won more medals than men. That was the first time we ever had more females in the team. And you're just seeing that sort of growth and say, you know, through sports like rugby sevens, like women's football, you know, that were kind of there and they just weren't really prominent. Whereas now there's just a real explosion of great women athletes, but also the vision that people, for young women, boys and girls, that they can do it, they can make it.
When I went to Japan last year and watched the best surfers in the world surfing in the same conditions, men and women, I was flabbergasted at how good the women were. Yes, the men were amazing, but the women were amazing. You know, there was actually not a lot of difference. Maybe the men are more powerful, but the women and the finesse and the grace and the power that they still had was phenomenal. So it's getting there. It really is getting there.
I think there was a time, you know, probably last century, but I think there was a time when you had the queen bee syndrome in women's sport, where you had women who were there and they were seen as blockers, and they didn't want anyone to take their seat, and that might not have been true, but it was sort of how it was perceived. Whereas I think now there's a much more inclusive, more collaborative approach for women helping women. And I see that like through our retired Olympians. I see it through our board, I see it through our teams. Women are really supporting each other to step up.
Wake up and smell the roses. There's a growing tidal wave of these amazing females. It's a huge market.
The steps there to go, and I think that's around commercial value and marketing and kind of understanding the value proposition of women's sport, because it's different. So I think that's a job of work to be done, and visibility on you know, mainstream media as well, still steps to be taken. And I do worry in the post-COVID environment that women and girls will potentially miss out on opportunities, because often, you know, when home calls, they have family and community obligations. So I think we really have to be mindful of that.
I don't believe that you should go, okay, here's the men's club, here's the women's club. I think that's the worst thing that could ever happen. I think it's that we're all in this together. It's hashtag let's do it together. You know, I've always been like that. I've never been like, oh, we should give female roles just to get the numbers up. No, the female should get the job because they're just as good as the men. So there should be no separation. It should be, we're all in this together, let's just do it.
Those sentiments, hashtag let's do this together, hashtag women helping women. It's the stuff we're going to talk about. Let's do this together with an amazing panel, introducing Lara, Jenny and Vanya. I'll start with you first, Lara, because you're closest to me and I can get at you. Just talking about the vision for sport and women's sport in New Zealand, and with a focus on Auckland too. And I don't want to talk vision statements, I want to talk just your wishes. What would you like to see women's sport become? How would you like to see it in the next few years? What's going to happen? Where is it going to be?
Gosh, it's a big question. I think I agree with Barbara and with Karen that we've come a long way, but we certainly have a lot of work still to do. And the international events that are going to be taking place in New Zealand over the next 2, 3, 4 years will certainly help to catapult us even further. But I'd like to see inclusivity in sport be the norm, be something that you don't have to think about. It's not something that you're trying to reach a quota, or that that we have to make sure we tick a box when we get to a certain meeting or at an event, but actually it's just something that is second nature that you actually don't have to think about. It's just what you do.
Yeah, we'll discuss how to potentially do that. But Jenny, you too, your thoughts on where we can go?
Yeah, just to build on Lara's thoughts, my thinking is, I've got a son and a daughter, and I want them to have equal opportunities to participate in sport, and whatever sport that might be. And I don't, we know the statistics, women and girls are less likely to participate in sport, and we need to use this opportunity as New Zealand is one of the few countries in the world with community participation out there at the minute. And this is the time to leverage our differences in the way that we as a community are able to collaborate, to give a platform for both girls, boys, women and men, equal opportunity to participate.
Vania, you wishes?
Kia ora, Nadine. Look, just what our fabulous girls have just mentioned, I think if we're going to be sustainable, if we're going to be really talking to the heart of diversity in sport, I hope that one day that we have the same offerings, the same opportunities for women, Apa Spika Māori people, and that it just becomes the norm, that we are, when we're talking in the conversations that we're having, that we're not speaking on just women's rugby or, that we're actually just talking about rugby and the sports. So just like Jenny here, I too have a son and daughter, and I want them both to have the same offerings equally as anybody else has, and whatever sport that they choose to play. So yeah, very similar visions. I think that's just a common theme that we have across women in sport, and also across the other levels of committees and governance and all of that. So yeah, I think we're singing the same song here.
So what are the challenges? What are the key challenges for you personally?
I think in most of our sport, and particularly, and I speak on my experiences in a community level in rugby, is that we don't have enough female coaches, female referees, just coaches and referees in general to cater for our games. I don't know if the same opportunities are presented in those governance levels or committees. And so if we are really honest and true about diversity, I think now is the time to be really brave. And I've heard that comment to me just recently, and I think in the midst of COVID, why not? Let's make a change and let's really make a difference while we can.
Jenny, what about you in terms of challenges?
Well, I think it's really apparent in every part of New Zealand that there is systemic inequity in how women and girls are funded in sport. And I think particularly in Auckland, what we do know is the largest funder is council into facilities and other areas of sport. So that's an area that we want to be at the table and have that conversation with council about how we support to ensure there are facilities for female umpires, referees, rugby players, and your facilities. So I think that is where we can start. Class 4 gaming is a huge contributor to sport. What I know in netball in the Auckland region, we get about $42 per participant. Rugby, cricket, football are all north of $150 per participant. So I think even in Auckland, we can control that, right? We're all voting, we're all ratepayers, we're all community members. We get to decide, should our girls and boys be funded equitably? So, in my mind, let's use that. In Auckland, we have a big platform. Another thing that I think is really important is, I think Michelle touched on it earlier, the diversity of our new Aucklanders is really key. And I think we know that our Asian population is growing massively. How will they want to participate in sport? Because I might not have the answers for that right now. And number 8 wire, thinking that, cricket, netball, football, wakaama, is in their DNA, we're sadly mistaken. So we need to start thinking differently and learn how to connect in different ways with what is going to be a new dynamic in Auckland.
Because Lara, you're quite an inclusive sport in terms of the level of women participation and ethnicity. Tell us a wee bit about that.
Yeah, so within wakaama, we actually have more women participating than men across every age group. So we're very inclusive. We cater for youngest paddler is 5, oldest is I think 85 currently. So the full cradle to grave kind of spectrum. And for Reasons currently unbeknown to us. We're doing a bit of work in research to find out why is it that women are more predominant across the board within our sport. And one of the reasons we feel that is because it is so inclusive. It is a really family-orientated sport where mum, dad and kids and grandparents can all participate at the same time, and that's something that really appeals not only to the large Māori and Pacific base that we have, but also to everybody. People want to be able to participate and do things with their families, especially when they're so busy in this changing world that we live in. So I think that's been a real positive for our sport. But just like Vania and Jenny said, definitely challenges around funding, around facilities, even within our sport, being a very small sport in Aotearoa, New Zealand, getting access to those funds and having very few facilities or access to facilities around the place, especially in Auckland, makes it very difficult and puts up barriers for participation. Auckland being so diverse, probably one of the most diverse cities in the world, and the biggest Pacific community within the Pacific, and as for our sport being the sport of origin from the Pacific, it's really the only sport of origin from the Pacific that's participated in. So there is plenty of opportunities for us to harness that community.
Yeah, well, let's just take a minute to recap on what you good people have said already. In terms of what we want, let's have a look at the vision. Like gender equality is a given. All girls are empowered to play sport regardless of their circumstance, and ethnicity and demographics taken into account. We want to continue to host major events, but that's going to be difficult in this COVID era at the moment. And that we shape the leaders, that we do get people into governance and we get them into refereeing and coaching. And COVID's obviously had an effect on you because your world champs that were going to be hosted here have been canned.
Our world champs that were in Hawaii, actually,
Hawaii.
Yes, but we had
money set aside to go there.
Yes, and we had a lot of people who were going to that event. But yeah, COVID's definitely impacted us. We've had to cancel all of our events. Just getting back on the board now with community events happening around the country. But yeah, it's a real opportunity as well. COVID's been a real opportunity to reassess, relook at what we do, how we do it, how we can do things differently, really differently, which I don't think people do enough of.
And just let's have a look at the challenges too, because we've managed to condense them into a bit of a slide. So challenges: affording to play sport, beating the inequity, coping with the impact of COVID. Jenny, looking at those world-class training and event facilities, and Auckland is a little bit lacking compared to the rest of the country when you think we don't have an oval, for instance, for cricket. We've got the World Cup coming here, and we don't have the best facility for it, the stadium.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. We've got to make sure that our facilities are fit for purpose to allow us to be this amazing host of world events, but also at a community level. Let's make sure that we are future-proofing. Netball is really fortunate. We've got a legacy of 100 years and we have facilities, and not to have women and men's toilets to me is a real, what, seriously, who built this? But I think it's a very real problem, and I want to be part of a solution that helps these guys in their chosen codes to put their foot in the door and say, look, we're here, treat us the way we should. So Auckland can build for this. We're a huge city. Council put a material amount of money into facilities. Let's make sure it's fit for purpose to allow all of our communities to participate.
Vanya, you know all about rugby club rooms. What's your thoughts on facilities?
Oh, did you see my facials? I'm glad the camera may not have got there. But when Jen was talking about facilities, now we all know that half the problem is we don't have enough toilets to cater for our female, whether they're participants or just supporters. We don't, let alone toilet paper, but let's not go there, we'll come back to that. And then we don't have shower facilities that are appropriate for not female, but also our Pasifika and Māori or different cultural diversity is really, if that's the starting point, then let's get our clubs into a position where they can be open and welcome people. I even look at our parents, and so if rugby is a sport, for families, and you've got siblings that are coming in, and even so for parents that come in, there are no changing baby facilities or tables for them to even cater for their babies. So it's just little things like that. Also, if I look at the Auckland area and our clubs that are in them, there are, I don't know the percentage or the number, there are some that are very dated. They haven't had the right, I suppose, support around financial, governance, or even the skill set to have access to the funding, or to even start the application to start up or upgrading their facilities. And so if you're looking at the environment of a club plays a huge part in to our people, and if it's not of a certain calibre, I think toilet facilities is not an ask, it's just a must, So yeah, if we look at those sorts of challenges, those are some practical things that we can actually do as a city if we want Auckland Sport to be open to all,
Get in there, rip in there, and create toilets. You reckon? That sounds fun to me. Hey, just going back to that slide, because there are a couple of other ones there at the bottom. Catering for the increased diversity, striking a balance between community and high performance sport, and also ensuring a share of voice. Striking that balance, how do you guys do it in terms of looking after the grassroots and then making sure that your elite athletes are catered for?
Well, from a netball perspective, our grassroots is our heart, and only the very few get to that elite level. So we're quite realistic that if kids are having a great quality experience in our sport, your sport, anyone's sport, they're going to grow into the leaders that we talked about. One of the huge opportunities, if you get kids that have come through sport and they've had a great experience, coached well, seen themselves in the dais, so I think that's really key. If you look at a netball, rugby, waka ama dais, they look like Kiwis. They look like New Zealand's diversity looking back at you, and I think that's phenomenal. I want my daughter to see women on the dais so that one day she can put her hand up and go, I could do that, I could give that a go. And it could be any sport, but let's make those women visible. If you can't see them, you can't be it, right? So the balance is, I believe that our young ones inspire the elite, and I think the elite play a role in delivering back into communities as leaders, as governors, as coaches of the future. And that's how the sport as a movement, and women's sport in particular, will benefit, because there's some incredibly smart people that have come through sport that have a lot to give. And I know in women's sport they want to do that. So yeah, now is the time to harness that energy.
Brilliant. Hey, we're going to come back soon to have a look at the ideas and initiatives that we need to address the challenges that women's sport is facing. And speaking of challenges, COVID-19, let's have hear from Kieran and Barbara again about their thoughts on the impact of this pandemic.
This is an amazing opportunity to learn, to diversify, to assess, to reflect, to reset, and so with every adversity there's always an opportunity.
Well, at the moment in our world it's very much about keeping athletes informed, trying to create a sense of hope, and trying to create a sense of community that everyone's supporting each other and we're better together. We are united. We're united by our vision and determination.
To be able to cope and to move forward, you have to self-reflect. You have to push the reset button and work out why you're doing what you're doing. What you were doing that wasn't that great, but you just did because it was habitual. And and implementing change is the hardest thing for most humans. So the COVID is a fantastic platform to say, okay, how can we do this better? How can we do this smarter? How can we do this more economically so it wins? How can we be more flexible?
At the community level, I think it's just that people want to get out and play and enjoy and be happy, connect. You can see that kind of coming out of your home. So I think the social role of sport for all New Zealanders has been really reinforced through COVID.
New Zealand has an opportunity here. They could actually open up our borders and say, just for as long as everyone goes through isolation, have your training camps here. Bring your athletes down here. It's a safe place to come.
I guess there's a little bridge at the moment though that needs to be we need to be thinking about, and that is, we're trying hard and stretch just to manage Kiwis coming home. So bringing in lots and lots of other, activities or people and events and athletes would just probably tip us over right now. So I think there's a time and a place for that, but we should absolutely be thinking about that.
I would be looking very jealously at the situation that we have in New Zealand if I was a sports person from overseas. And in fact, I have been contacted by 2 or 3 of my friends that live overseas wanting to bring their families here and trying to get residencies here. And if I was Jacinta, I'd be going, I want you, I want you, I want you, because they are outstanding individuals that if we had them in the New Zealand sporting community, we would be in they're great people, great athletes, have amazing families, and they'd be a real asset to our country. So yes, I would be wanting, if I was an athlete, I know many athletes want to come training here, the windsurfers, they all want to come here over the European winter, because it's a safe place to come. And it's worth the 2 week of isolation just to be in a country where we can compete and have great training.
Our competitive advantage in terms of attracting people to live, to host events as a training ground, what better? We've got the greatest training ground in the world. So that's a massive opportunity.
Wow, how about that, Barbara Kendall, eh? We've got a great city here. It's a world-class city. All you athletes from around the world, come live and play. We might have to do a little bit in terms of our facilities, but by and large, it's pretty impressive. And Vanya, we've seen this with the Polynesian immigration in the last 30 to 40 years and the contribution to New Zealand sport.
Yeah, no, I can't deny that. I think if you look at our international teams across all sports, not just rugby, but they really do reflect our communities. The high percentage of Pacifica, Māori, all cultural, very, very diverse. So I think if we're going to look forward, a couple of things that we could look at is affordability in our sports. So I know that our sports are relatively accessible and they are affordable. Whereas if we were looking at, I suppose from a high performance point of view, if we wanted to have more Olympians, perhaps the affordability is the barrier that is stopping our Pacific people from excelling. Imagine the athletes that we could have in rowing or many other sports or in an Olympic level. But from a community point of view, we know that connections is very, very important. So connecting as a village or connecting to parents, that's something that we can enhance or grow. I think there's room to move there. And then visibility, as we've spoken about, being able to see who is on those platforms. I mean, sport is one platform that we can use to unify and unite. But I think if we're going to really use those opportunities, those offerings for our Pacific people, those are the sorts of things that we can look at. Affordability, being intentional when we're looking at sport, when we're looking at other roles, and also the connections within our community. As Jenny said, our community or our club rugby, our school rugby, that's the heart of our sport. And even in we can use sport as the vehicle to drive lots of other things.
And you talked about a village. New Zealand's practically a village. So how do we interact with each other? How do we collaborate? Women to women.
Yeah, well, just like we're doing now, we're really bouncing ideas off each other, and I think that can happen across the country, and especially within the sports industry. There's, we've got Kieran and Barbara, amazing advocates for sport, women's sport, but there's hundreds of those, if not thousands of those people all around New Zealand, not just women as well. There's plenty of male advocates for women's sport across the country, and bouncing all of those ideas and coming up with some new models would be great.
I think we underutilise Barbara. And as much as I love seeing Sir Stephen Hansen the other day, how's she not a dame? She's won 3 medals. She's been on IOC committees and she's Vice President of New Zealand World Surfing Association. Are women being recognised?
Well, clearly Barbara has been an amazing servant for sport, and particularly New Zealand sport. We were really fortunate that our coach was recognised as Dame Nolene Taurua recently. So I think that we, as a sport, I think our women have been recognised, but I couldn't speak for other codes. And I think those people are sitting in the background of sport as much as they sit at the pointy end in that elite space. It's the club administrators, it's the volunteers that are opening the doors every day. So I think that there's a really rich tapestry in sport, and I know, my knowledge is, I know netball was a sport built on volunteers because women couldn't work in the 60s. It wasn't the done thing, so they went and they volunteered at their local netball club or where their kids were playing sport. So I think what you've got is this group of women that have done a lot on very little, and I think that if we open the door to these conversations more frequently and they get a hearing at the highest tables, not just in the back room of sport, that they've got a place sitting with council, with government, direct with government, at Sport New Zealand's table, voicing that Māori and Pacifica women should not be treated like the male model for high performance sport, that there is going to be different considerations needed for those athletes at an elite level, which brings us into we must cater for everyone at a community level. So I think there is a lot of opportunity. I've talked about these mega franchises and multi-sports hubs. I think there are things like that are no-brainers, but we've all got to be brave to go there.
Would you be comfortable, like netball's sort of top of the pecking order in New Zealand women's sport? Are you willing to let other sports come to the party as well?
Totally. I mean, I want women's sport to thrive, women and girls. So if that means that we're working together, because that one kid, they're going to, if they, balance is better is one of the philosophies that we've embraced. If that child wants to play badminton and hockey and football, let them. Like, why are we, let's not own that child. We don't own that child. That kid's going to choose eventually, if they're going to be any good, they might choose the sport that they prefer, but in the meantime, let them be kids and try everything.
Yeah, so much of the focus is at the high performance end in terms of the media in New Zealand and just where the attention falls. But actually, just what Vanya and Jenny have said, the real heart of sport and women's sport and all sport is at the community. And that philosophy of balance is better and allowing youth to participate in whatever they want across the board is only going to make them better and love sport for the love of sport, not just to get to the top. And that's what's going to give them the longevity. And maybe they won't reach the elite level, but they may go on to be amazing administrators and amazing governors. And that's what we need because there aren't enough of those people around currently.
And with our borders,
Sorry, Dave, just as an example of this, and we often have parents nowadays, can you believe it, but in women's rugby anyway, in schoolgirls rugby, they have come to see us and the questions are, what school does my kid go to play rugby? And I'm like, are you serious? And then the other questions are, oh look, my daughter plays netball, rugby, and then she plays touch and she plays volleyball. What would your advice be? And hand on heart, I'm like, let her play it all. Let her play netball, let her play rugby. She's too young, and don't specify so early. And I love that we are all on the same page. And I think as an organisation or as a sport, I think we've got room to move to work in collaboration. And so that's what I look forward to. And I think even just hearing some of the visions and the heart of Jenny and Lara, I think we're in a really good place. And I'm looking forward to what that looks like. So.
We'll have a look at our initiatives slides in a minute, but just before that, domestic competition being fed to the world with our borders closed, ANZ Championships been going off, particularly now that the Pulse have been beaten and there's a real spark in there. We've seen Super Rugby Aotearoa just go off. The NBL beamed into the States. Creating world-class domestic competitions, is that a goal?
Yeah, yes, definitely. Should be a goal. Would be great. I reckon it would have been great to see Super Rugby Aotearoa Women Edition and the NBL having a a competition running alongside the one that they currently had for women at the same time. That would have been a great opportunity in this environment.
And Vanya thanks you for bringing that up and not her, because she's employed by.
But I will say this, and like 100%, like I know that we will get there eventually, but I know that the resources that have been put into our domestic competition in Wharapama Cup is what we are looking forward to, and they're kicking off August the 22nd. We're very close. We've had to change a few things. We now have two sort of, not tier, but a North Island and a South Island, and so if going off the back of the weekend just gone in terms of the club finals, if that is anything to go by, full-time, 20 all, Manurewa, Ponsonby Phillies, they went into extra time. I mean, that you might have thought that you're at a Super Rugby Aotearoa game, but if that's anything to go by, imagine what Wharapama Cup is going to look like. So we have invested a lot into that. The girls they're in camp today, the Black Ferns wider squad. So I 100% agree with you. If we are delivering world-class domestic competitions, that's where we are trying to, and even utilising the broadcast, to get them on television, because as we know, you can't be it unless you see it.
No, we'll have a chat about that in a minute, because the broadcasting side of things, and with social media these days, live streaming, being able to do it yourself, there's obviously some opportunities around that. Let's have a look at our initiative slides. Collaboration has come through really strongly. Women supporting women and meshing and growing these networks, having world-class domestic competitions, doing what Barbara Kendall says, and luring people from offshore, and creating opportunities for our own. We've also got to leverage these upcoming World Cups and the IWG conference that's coming up too. There's more initiatives, I think. Oh, there we go. Seeking partnerships on this multi-use hubs, the mixed sports facilities, the broadcasting opportunities, via live streaming. How are we looking at live streaming our events? I guess Netball New Zealand's a little bit different. You're at an elite end. How do you cover your events, Lara?
We have a national club championship which takes place every January at Lake Karapiro. We have 3,850 competitors at that, and it's live streamed, has been for quite a number of years. And there's a big demand for people who want to see their family, the people they know. That people want to watch. They can't get to it. They want to be able to watch it, and it's become more and more so probably in the last 5-6 years that people just want to be able to switch on their phone and see the sport they love to do. And so trying to make that, it's a bit like going to an event and not being able to get a coffee. It just doesn't happen anymore. So toilets, coffee and live streaming, it's a given.
Love it. Hey, we're going to have a think about the initiatives and how we actually turn them into affirmative action. But in the meantime, let's just hear one final time from Kieran and Barbara as they embrace the upcoming 3 World Cups and they give their thoughts on the future of women's sport.
We're seeing, a change in and around broadcasting and more value of women's sport, and the social digital media. You can create your own voice and your own platform, and I'm really optimistic if I think about from Olympic, Commonwealth point of view. It's a great time to bring women forward, and they really get showcased and show their talent. So I'm optimistic, but we've still got a ways to go.
When I came through, and I had kids being towed around the world with me and competing at World Champs, it was just like, well, most women stay at home and look after their kids once they have a baby. What the heck do you think you're doing? So these are the things that, were told to me when I was coming through. But now they're like asking the question, okay, you can still keep competing until, your mid-30s, even 40s, which I did. So what can we do to help?
I see the women's sport strengthening from the bottom to the top. And where I see the growth coming through is just women and girls being able to be more present across the board. So I think what we've traditionally seen is women in their kind of comfort zones, areas where they've been traditionally welcome in the netball and the hockey spaces. But I see that's changing, and you see girls and boys playing, rugby together, and and football together, and around the communities, rugby league. There's not much, kids are just playing sport, boy or girl. So I think there's going to be an uplift.
So definitely having these 3 World Cups, girls will be saying, hey, I want to do that. And as long as the sports are ready for the influx to cope with these young girls that want to give it a go, which would be great.
On the real visible end and the pointy high performance end, we're going to see more women doing better, because we've got great athletes and they're adaptable and they work hard, and we've got the support. Where I would like to see more momentum is in and around their, I guess, the visibility, their presence, continuing around the board tables, and making sure, and probably the area where we're really lacking is in coaching, is getting more females coaching females and males. But we don't have as many high performance coaches as I think we could and should have that are female.
So if you're really smart about these elite events, and people are wanting to promote sport and get kids into sport, then the organisers need to get in around and go, right, let's give the kids free tickets, let's put on buses, let's get them in here, let's get them exposed to them, let's have a go. So they have these active zones all around the events and parks which were attached to each of the events, and the kids could all just hang out with their families, have a go, have the experience. That's how you get kids involved.
Well, I think it would be just amazing if I reflect on things like the Rugby World Cup and the Cricket World Cup and the Netball World Cup, but those have galvanised New Zealanders. You put on your coats, or you go and watch the game, or you're sitting up, you've got all your mates watching. To think that would happen for 3 female World Cups, that we would inspire boys and girls, a future generation. We give our volunteers and our officials and everyone a chance to touch and feel world-class women's sport. And for our female athletes to play at home in a World Cup would be monumental. Very, very special.
Yes, it's time to wrap up our panel discussion with some final thoughts from our esteemed panel. Vanya, from you, where do you see the future of women's sport? Where are we going?
I think we're heading in the right direction, that's for sure. I think we've touched on it, we're only just scratching the surface. My thing would be, if we, now is the time to be brave, I've said that before, and if we are brave, that we are intentional around who it is that we are shoulder tapping. If you don't have a certain person or offering, then go ahead and get it. And then the next part about that, what I would think would be to be intentional when you're listening, because there's one thing about bringing people to the table, but if that's just it, then nothing else will happen or work. So if you're brave enough to open your minds and hearts to those sorts of conversations, we'll only be better for it. And I suppose leveraging off the 3 female World Cups that we have in rugby, football and cricket, because I was going to throw netball in there. Why not? Why not, guys?
We'll see.
But if we're going to leverage off that, I would love to see a legacy piece that doesn't just plan right to the World Cups, but that it is after. What are we going to do after to make sure that it's sustainable, that we are continuing to grow, and that we are really opening up ourselves vulnerably to diversity. And that's me in a nutshell.
And passing on.
Thanks for that pass. Agree with everything that you've said, and I think the real growth opportunity in sport at the moment is women's sport. So if everyone was to look at their product suite, they would probably see that community participation, even at that elite, the product that you're putting on TV, it's going to grow in the women's space, and that's where any growth is coming from. So if I was in a corporate world, I would be investing in women's sport. And I think that our corporate consumers and the decision makers are mothers. They will choose. And those corporates, I think there will be a shift as to where they put their energies to get that best value, because if you're chasing growth, it's certainly going to be in the women's game.
And we've got to make sure that as women, we do support the companies that are supporting women's sport.
Correct.
Does that happen enough?
I think we can always do better, right? But
I think, as Vania said, it's probably not intentional. So there needs to be more intention around, we are going to support this because they are supporting women's sport. I don't think that happens intentionally at the moment, and that's probably a place where we need to get to. But moving forward, just building off those World Championship events, but just like Vania said, or looking to what's beyond those. And what's going to happen in 10 years? What the legacy from those events and all of the excitement around that, and what actually does that mean for 10 years time, 20 years time, and what does that space look like? And being able to use this special COVID time, it is special, it's unique. You can look at it as a real negative, but there are definitely some positives. And being able to use this really special time that we've been given to take a bit of a leap, to do some things that you just wouldn't do, and just step off the edge
into the abyss,
and just see what happens, and go for it. And because you can't really get worse. So we just need to step forward, do some things that we've never done before in a lot of sports, a lot of organisations, especially around governance and administration and media and exposure and what we're putting out for people to see, and just go ahead and do it and see what happens.
Well, let's do it with the action point slide, and we'll rip through that quickly and then let these good people go. So action points from here, and thanks for all the feedback on Facebook, by the way. It's been really humbling, it's awesome. We're going to put these up on our site, and we're going to work with people to try and get some of this stuff happening. We're going to look to build communication links between all the women's advocacy groups and get them sharing. Need to look at funding agencies and how they can feed infrastructure and get kids who can't afford to play sport into it. Collaboration on upgrading infrastructure and facilities, crowdsourcing opportunities. Some people that I know get all their admin and finance outsourced via one of their sponsors, and it frees them up to do better stuff and the stuff that they're really good at, core business. We're going to work with social media and broadcasting experts to amplify our noise and look at broadcasting events. We're still going. We're going to seek funds to support women in coaching and refereeing development, which I think is really important, obviously. Embrace the immigrant communities, collaborate, and we're going to get them behind the sponsors that get them behind women's sport. So, guys, I can't thank you enough for being here. It has just been a pleasure. Vania, Jenny, Lara, I hope we do this again, and we do it over the course of 3 or 4 hours so that we can really rip in. Valuable time, awesome knowledge, great input. Thank you so very much. So our time's running out. I'd like to thank the other people who've scrambled to help me put on this webcast at extremely short notice. But we've got another couple of webcasts coming up. In a few weeks we're going to do community sport, and a week after that we're going to have a good look at high performance sport. And just want to thank a whole heap of people, particularly Regional Facilities Auckland and ATEED, who've helped get this together and get us into Auckland Live here at the Herald Theatre. Michelle Cox, Karen Smith and Barbara Kendall for their support. Andrew Dewhurst has been amazing in the control room. He's been feeding me stuff. It's been superb. Francis and Eddie have been great here at Auckland Live, and SAS Creative and Zach Spear, who've done some videos and whatnot. Can't thank you enough. So that's about it from us. We do have, like I say, some more coming up in a couple of weeks, but for now, let's get them behind the movement to support women's sport. So that we can continue to grow. We'd encourage you to get in behind women's sport however you can. Share the sports news that you see on social media. Buy the products from the sponsors that are supporting women's sport. Just fuel the excitement that's coming up around these 3 upcoming World Cups. It's going to be epic. So hashtag women and men supporting women, and hashtag all in this together. That was a good one. I think we might get sued by High School Musical, but other than that, thank you guys once again. Thank you RFA ATEED. Thank you all for watching. We will catch you in a couple of weeks. Cheers. Love your work.